Good day and welcome back. Well, I've had this Remington Quiet-Riter for quite a few years. Haven't really used it much, haven't really worked on it that much, but recently we brought it out to a type-in. And a lot of people used it, and I started playing with it when I got home with it, just to make sure everything was working fine, and I noticed it had a couple problems. It had some ghosting on the characters when you type, especially when you type a little bit more firmly on the keys. It was making a faint ghost impression just to the right of the letters. Not all the time, though. And there was some ribbon lift issues. The tops of the black ink characters were slightly cut off, and then the capitals had a little bit of red on them. And so it needed a little bit of ribbon lift adjustment, as well as troubleshooting this mysterious problem of ghosting on the imprint. I thought I'd walk you through the process I used to figure out how to fix it. So stay tuned. So here's an example of the ghosting that was happening. You can see it on the slashes and on the K's and the L's especially. And it varied depending on how hard you hit the keys. The harder you hit the keys, the more the ghosting happened. And I originally thought maybe the platen was too hard. So I did roll in some extra sheets of backing paper, and it didn't help at all. And then I started looking at, like, if maybe the trip point of the escapement, maybe the carriage was still moving when it was printing, but actually the trip point, as I moved like one of the middle type bars up toward the print position, it was tripping early. According to the manual, this should trip right when the face of the type slug touches the ribbon, which is pretty close, closer than a lot of other brands. Now this was about at least a half an inch back, so I thought, oh, that's kind of weird. And then I pushed on the carriage to kind of slow down the spring force, and I could get it to print without any ghosting if I slowed down the action of the motion of the carriage. And I was thinking, well, that's kind of weird. That's kind of like a timing issue of some kind, but it didn't really make sense because the carriage movement felt fine. It didn't feel like it was too light or too heavy on the spring motor. I did make some adjustments to the spring motor just in case, but it didn't really help. So I wasn't sure if the escapement trip point would actually fix the problem, but I wanted to be sure. So the first thing I did is I went ahead and removed the escapement as per the procedure in the manual that I found on Dr. Polt's website, the Classic Typewriter page. So if you go to the Classic Typewriter page and click on Service Manuals, and then you scroll down to Remington Service Manual, you notice right here a 1953 Service Manual for the Quiet-Riter, Office Writer, there it is. And then there'll be a table of contents in here. And so I'm interested in several different adjustments. So there's a shifting mechanism, the escapement, trip point, etc. We're going to go down to each one of these procedures and look at them. So I first wanted to check the escapement setup and the escapement timing to make sure that wasn't the cause of the problem. So as per the service manual, you want to first disconnect this spring right up here, the end of the spring. You'll need a spring hook for that. And then you're going to take out the whole escapement mechanism by taking out this screw here, and this screw right back here. And once you do that, this whole escapement assembly will pop right out. And then you can go through the service manual and do the adjustments or the checks as per this procedure to make sure that everything is set up right. What I found with mine was that it was pretty much set up right. However, once I put it back in, I needed to adjust the escapement trip point. And to do that, the trip point is this right here on the left, the top one. So you're going to adjust the trip point, and the trip point has to be set so that the face of the type slug trips the escapement when the face of the type slug is right near the ribbon itself. So what you'll do is you'll put a slotted screwdriver on the end of the screw, keep it from turning, you'll loosen the nut, and then you will adjust the screw, and you drive it in or clockwise to make the tripping happen earlier, and you screw it out to make it happen later. I had to screw this one out to make it trip later because it was tripping too early. And then by keeping the screw from turning with a screwdriver, you then lock down the nut. So after reinstalling the escapement and getting the trip point set properly as per the manual, of course, the ghosting problem didn't go away, but at least I eliminated the escapement and the timing of it from being that problem. So then I had to start thinking, what else could be causing this? Well, the platen didn't really feel excessively hard, actually. I did try a couple extra sheets of paper as backing sheet. Didn't really help either. And then I started thinking, what if it's hitting the platen too hard and bouncing? And what would cause that? Well, that would be the ring and cylinder adjustment. So the cylinder in that ring and cylinder phrase refers to the platen itself, and the ring refers to the anvil ring, that crescent-shaped metal bar below the print position, kind of behind, at the back of the segment, that the little bottom edge of the type bars hit. And so what's supposed to happen is when the type bar hits the anvil, there's supposed to be a certain amount of thin gap between the face of the type slug and the platen. And if that setting isn't right, it could either be too light of imprint or hitting the platen too hard, in which that's what I thought it was, hitting too hard and maybe making a bounce. And so to test out my theory before I went to do the adjustment, I went ahead and put some thin paper along that crescent-shaped anvil surface, just cut out a little piece from cardstock, and sure enough, the problem went away. I could type as hard as I wanted with the forward slash and any of the other characters, no ghosting. So I knew, okay, this is my problem. The anvil setup, the cylinder and anvil setting is wrong. So I went to the manual and did that adjustment. 27 of the manual is the cylinder and anvil position. So let's go down to page 27, cylinder and anvil. So the description of the procedure is right here, and the diagrams that they're referring to are actually this big diagram here that's sideways. Basically, this eccentric screw right here is the one that we're going to adjust, along with loosening one of these two screws here in order to make this bracket movable. You turn it one way to get more cylinder printing and the other way to get more anvil contact. You have these two mounting screws of the segment roller guide bracket, and you want to loosen one of those. I ended up loosening both of them. And then you loosen this locking screw right here with a slotted screwdriver. And then it'll take a 3/8 inch wrench to adjust the nut itself. And this is an eccentric nut like a cam. In order for you to adjust it for more anvil, that is, for it to strike the anvil more than the platen, you want to turn this so that the wide part of the nut is closer to the front of the machine or up here. Conversely, if you wanted more cylinder and less anvil, you would turn it so that the narrow side of the nut, which is back here, is facing the front of the machine. I had to turn it so that it was more of the wide side here, facing the front of the machine. And then once you have it set, keeping the nut from turning, you lock down the screw again, and then you lock down the other two mounting screws, and then you want to test it. And it took me several attempts testing it to get the right setup. Now, another thing you need to be aware of, according to the procedure, is once you adjust this, it will throw off your on feet in motion, specifically the lowercase. And so I had to go back and adjust that as well. They recommend using the capital letters for checking on feet, as it's easier to detect any misalignment of that. Basically, the adjustment is to set it so that the tops and bottoms of the letters print with the same density while holding the shift key. In other words, you're not using shift lock, pressing the shift key itself. And then you want to lightly print all the capital letters. It's easier to observe the issue when they're lightly printed. And then it tells you how to adjust it with screw number 8. And the locations of those screws in this diagram here is screw 8. Loosen its locking nut first and adjust it so that it is printing fine, and it's going to be an iterative adjustment. So once you have the on feet proper, so the shading is not there, so it's printing evenly, then you're going to adjust motion using the lowercase screw 9. Typically, we use the H, set it for the bottom of the H's are properly aligned, the upper and lower case. And here is screw 9. And on feet is when the tops and bottoms of the characters both print evenly. This is otherwise known as the uppercase position. So if you do have any kind of shading on the top or bottom, you want to adjust this screw. You'll hold the screw firmly with a slotted screwdriver, loosen the nut. I find a 5.5 millimeter socket works good. And then you want to adjust the screw, and then keeping it from turning by holding it with your slotted screwdriver, you want to tighten the nut again. And then you want to test it, and you'll probably iteratively have to go back and forth with this adjustment until you get it so the letters are not shaded. Once they're not shaded, they print evenly. Then you want to do the motion. The motion is the lowercase position. It is this screw adjustment down here at the bottom. You're trying to match the feet of the lowercase characters with the feet of the top characters on the printing line. For instance, the letter H is really good for this. So you'll want to iteratively adjust this and match it up between the uppercase and lowercase h. Try L, M, N, a few other letters until the feet of the letters are on the same line. And again, you want to tighten it up firmly without changing the adjustment. Once you've done that, you want to go back and recheck the anvil and cylinder adjustment again to make sure it hasn't shifted. And in this case, the problem was the ghosting. So I wanted to retype and check the ghosting and make sure it wasn't coming back. And now this line is where I finally got the anvil set up properly using the adjustment on that cam nut. I was able to repeatedly type very hard without any ghosting, which really was good. Here's an example, some more of the slashes, all this typing without any ghosting. But I did have the upper and lower case now was off, the motion was off, and so here I had to readjust the motion and get it set up properly. And then earlier, during my testing, I had noticed that when I was printing on the bottom half of the ribbon in red, there was a little bit of shading of black at the top of those letters. And so I knew that the ribbon lift needed to be adjusted. I initially took apart the right body panel because that's the mechanism for the ribbon color selector, but it turned out the adjustment is underneath the machine right next to the escapement. So all of these adjustments I did, you don't need to take any body panels off. It's all accessible from the bottom of the machine. But I did the ribbon lift adjustment. You see this screw 9. This is the ribbon actuator arm hub set screw. You loosen this screw and you can push up this linkage a little bit or actually pull up on the vibrator and then retighten the screw. And you're basically setting the angle of this arm against the rotation of the shaft. So when you type a character, this shaft rotates, and this collar has a set screw. This collar is actually pushing the arm that lifts up the ribbon vibrator. So you basically want to loosen this nut, and then by holding the shaft firmly, you can change the angle of this collar and retighten the nut, and that basically changes the lifting of the vibrator. And so by setting this properly, you'll be able to print both black and red characters without any shading on them. So you can see on this first test print of the red slash, there's a little bit of black above it, and afterwards, after I adjusted it, you can see it prints nicely with no shading, no coloration. And so after making the ribbon lift adjustment, I did a full test of upper lowercase, both black and red, and it works really well, prints really great, no shading, no miscoloration, no ghosting. I'm really happy with the results of all these adjustments I did. So I did escapement trip point, ring and cylinder, on feet and motion, and ribbon lift adjustments. All of those needed to be happening, and the ring and cylinder and on feet and motion were interrelated or interactive. You have to kind of iteratively go back and forth between those. Having done all those, I'm really happy. This is the best that this machine has ever printed. And it's a lesson that I should have not ignored this. If you have machines in your collection that are marginal, that have little nagging problems, well, maybe take one of those out of your collection, put them down on the workbench, and start tackling the problem one at a time. You might find it's easier to fix than you think. Well, I wouldn't have been able to make these repairs successfully, I think, without the help of those online resources like the Typewriter Repair Bibles that Ted Monk publishes, and also the legacy user manuals and repair manuals that Richard Polt has on his classic typewriter page. Those are invaluable for us hobbyists to figure out how to make these proper adjustments. And of course, with this one, I certainly needed the help of the factory service manuals. But I'm really glad to say that this machine is really in better shape than it's been since since I've owned it. But in the meantime, I encourage you guys, don't be bashful about looking at your collection and thinking about improving the mechanical reliability of it. There are online resources, not only the service manuals, but there are some Facebook groups that can help you connect with other typewriter aficionados who have more experience with working on these machines. And so the typewriter community is a very great resource to tie into and to learn how to maintain and use your machines for the purpose of ultimately expressing our creativity. And so I wish you the very best. Stay creative and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.